Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Brandy. I'm a homeschooling mom of 4, and once a month I get on here and recap all the books that I read for my own enjoyment and also the books that I read to my kids. So if you're a homeschooling parent who loves to read yourself and also has elementary age kids that you want to read aloud to, these are the perfect videos for you. I highly recommend you go back and watch some of my other videos because I have lots of recommendations. This month I read 10 books in their entirety, and I DNF'd 3. So I'm going to talk about all the books that I read, and some of these are children's books and some of these are books that I read for my own enjoyment. The first book that I finished this month was George's Marvelous Medicine by Roald Dahl. I know that Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, some of these are some of his most famous books, but George's Marvelous Medicine is an absolute laugh out loud 5-star Roald Dahl book. I highly recommend you read it to your kids. So, convinced that his grandmother is a witch, George decides that he's not going to give grandmother the medicine that he gives her every day at 11 o'clock. He's going to give her his own concoction and just see what happens. See if he can blow the old lady away. Now, this is definitely not a politically correct book. I think it was written in the 80s. And there are I would say, some language that's probably not the best, because one of the things that Roald Dahl likes to explore in a lot of his books is kind of like the powerlessness of childhood. And so in this story, that theme is explored greatly. George is this kid who, is very quiet and introverted. He doesn't really bother anyone, yet his grandmother is constantly antagonizing him, constantly saying things to him that are mean and hateful, and also just trying to disgust George in a way by telling him all of these stories about people that she's known that's eaten disgusting things like worms, and just kind of trying to gross him out and make him feel very uncomfortable. She's always looking at him and glaring at him and saying hateful things. And when George's parents are around, she acts totally normal. But when it's just she and George, she's always making his life hell, essentially. And so George is ready to get back and get retribution for all the times that grandma has aggrieved him. And he doesn't want to kill her or anything. He just wants to kind of get back at her for all of the evil that she does to him. And what happens is she takes this medicine and some wild things happen to grandma. And it is just a fantastic story. It's very short. All of my kids gave this one 5 stars, and I could not recommend it enough. Great, great storytelling. The second book I read was for my own enjoyment. It was called The Switch by Beth O'Leary. I have talked about this author before. I really love her books. And this book follows Lena and her grandmother, who basically, for their own reasons, want to escape their lives. So Lena is in her 20s or either 20s or early 30s, working in London, and she has a really high pressure job, and her sister passes away. And instead of coping with her sister's death, she ends up like jumping headlong into her work and really kind of crashing and burning out and flopping this really high stakes meeting that she had. And so her job says, you have to go on a holiday for a month. We're not asking, we're telling you, you gotta go. And so her work is her life, and it's been her distraction from her sister's death. Meanwhile, her grandmother has been left by her husband of many, many years for a younger woman. And she's really unbothered by it. Like, she was ready to get rid of him anyway, sort of thing. And she wants to find love, but she lives in a very rural part of England. I think it's Yorkshire, I think is what it's called. But it's a small community where there aren't very many eligible bachelors. And she decides that she and Lena had the idea, they switch lives. Grandma goes to London and she goes to the countryside for a respite. She has to deal with some uncomfortable situations with her mother, who she feels like allowed her sister to die by not seeking more cancer treatment. All of this is in the beginning of the book, but it's such a good story, so warm, heartwarming, fun to read. Grandma's adventures in London are very fun to read. So if you want a good contemporary fiction book to sink your teeth into, I highly recommend The Switch by Beth O'Leary. I gave it 4 stars. It was really good. The next book that I read was called So Happy Together, and I didn't write the author's name down, but I will post a picture of it here. And it follows Jane Williams, who basically becomes obsessed with this guy named Colin after meeting him and dating him online for just a couple of short months. Well, he breaks it off with her. He pretty much dumps her, and she turns into a stalker essentially and starts stalking his every move. She ends up befriending the girl who he's dating next, and you'll have to read the book to find out what happens. But this is a psychological thriller that goes really from bad to worse. I do feel like some of the twists in the book were a little bit unbelievable, but if you can suspend your disbelief a bit, I think you could really enjoy this book. The pacing is really quick, and I gave this one 4 stars as well. The beginning of the book begins like a rom-com. You're going to probably think, what? This doesn't seem like a thriller. Stick with it. It gets really crazy really fast. I don't think it's the best writing in the world. I don't think it's earth-shattering. This is not Elizabeth Strout or, Anne Patchett. This is not an excellent work of literary fiction. It's just a good time and a quick palate cleanser. If you're in a reading slump, So Happy Together may get you out of it, especially if you're not one that takes reading too seriously. The next book that I read was called The Terrible Truth About Third Grade. I read this aloud to my second and third graders. This is an Appleback classic. So I don't know if you guys remember these from when you were a kid, but Appleback classics were those old school stories. I'll put a picture here where it's like two old school looking kids on the front and they're up to no good or whatever. Anyway, this one follows Babette. Her actual name is Jane, but she is a precocious third grader who is very well read and ends up reading like a bunch of like adult fiction because she's really bored by the assignments and the homework that her teacher gives. And she starts making up fantastic stories because she's really bored with school. And it really explores themes of, honestly, like if you're an adult reading it, childhood giftedness and the incongruent ways that kids do not fit in with their peers. And also need additional like support if they're gifted. A lot of times they are really intelligent, and giving them the basic assignments that you give other kids may not be very helpful. But really, from a child's perspective, it explores honesty and the ways that children fabricate and lie and the twisted webs that they find themselves in as a result. And the teacher ends up punishing Babette in a way for her dishonesty. And so it really feels nostalgic and old school. My kids loved the story, and I gave it 4 stars. They gave it 5 stars. So definitely, if you have a little liar, a child who has a penchant for dishonesty, I would say reading this book can be a cautionary tale for how lies can get you in trouble. And it's just a good story. It's a really good story. It also explores bullying and some other themes that may be relevant for a second or third grader. Next, I'm going to talk about the 3 books that I DNF'd, and I'll finish with the books that I really enjoyed this month. The next book that I read was also a thriller. It's called The Last Housewife, and it was recommended by a YouTuber here. I found that after attempting to read 3 of her books, their books are just not for me. But anyway, it's a thriller. This woman has a friend who has died, and the police think it's suicide. And she pretty much teams up with another college friend that has turned into a podcaster to be a sleuth and try to get down to the bottom of her friend's murder. I got 25% into this book, and I just felt like it was not good. It was not good. It was like I'm a quarter of the way through this book. Nothing really has happened that I find to be relevant to the story, like what's on the back of the dust jacket. It doesn't seem like the type of book that I think it's going to be at all. There's so many irrelevant details and so many things that happened in the very beginning of the book that I'm like, all right, maybe this comes together later, but I really don't care about the characters enough to keep going. Same thing with My Darlings by Marie Steele. I felt like this book, the book follows a mom who is like a PTA mom. She seems to have it all together, but really behind the scenes, she's a serial killer and she's killing random women. Here's what I hated about this book was that she's literally killing people for no reason. Like, I don't like books like that. Like, You know, what gave Dexter his appeal when you were following a psychological, like a psychopath or a sociopath who has no feelings, is that they're supposed to be rectifying some wrong. Or like in the case of Dexter, you know, somebody does something terrible to someone else and Dexter goes and kills them. And you're like, yes, I'm rooting for Dexter because Dexter is righting a wrong. This woman is unhinged and a crazy psychopath. And I saw this Goodreads review that was like, you know, she's killing because lols, like LOL, like I want to and it's fun. And when I was a kid, I accidentally murdered my neighborhood friend and I watched his body in a river drown and him die, and I really loved it. And now I'm growing up and nobody would ever suspect that I would be murdering random people in my town and I'm inciting all of this terror, and it's wonderful. It's like I did not care at all. Like, get caught, don't get caught. Like, I did not care because the premise was so stupid. It's like, I know that there are murderers out there who murder for no reason. I don't want to read about them. That's not why we read about a psycho. Like, maybe if you're a psycho yourself, you would enjoy this book, but I did not. Her book that I DNF'd, honestly, I got 50% through this book. And it was called Because I Could Not Stop for Death. This was the murder mystery book club pick for our library. I'm a part of a book club and we pretty much meet once a month. It's like a murder mystery book club. And this was their pick. And it was a historical fiction that really follows, it's like an Emily Dickinson murder, which I really liked Emily Dickinson when I was in high school. But so this was, from what I'm told, I'm no Emily Dickinson expert, but I'm told that it's pretty historically accurate. If you like historical fiction, it's a very cozy mystery where this girl is Emily Dickinson's maid, for lack of a better term, and she and Emily Dickinson developed this friendship, and during the course of the book, her mother or her brother, who is her only family member, dies. And she and Emily Dickinson pair up to try to solve the murder. It just felt like the story was meandering in a way that wasn't really pleasant because there wasn't a lot of character development for the girl we were following. And, you know, there were all these pointless details about Emily Dickinson that you could tell were put in there for historical accuracy, but it just felt like there was no plot. Like, this is a murder mystery. Let's go. Like, let's get into it. And I just felt like it never did. So, moving right along, those were my 3 DNFs. The next 2 books I'm going to talk about is 2 Beverly Cleary books for your 3rd graders or your elementary. The Mouse and the Motorcycle, and I read the sequel, which is Runaway Mouse. Runaway Ralph. But anyway, The Mouse and the Motorcycle follows this mouse named Ralph who lives in a rat hole in a small inn. And so it really follows the trajectory of Ralph as this reckless, irresponsible mouse, and his character development throughout the story is impeccable. I loved it. I loved how by the end of the story, Ralph was a responsible mouse, but you find out in the sequel that he's still kind of has some of his reckless behavior. But however, in The Mouse and the Motorcycle, which is the only one that I read aloud to my kids, he meets a boy named Keith, and he and Keith become friends. It explores friendship and loyalty and responsibility and what it means to be responsible and how reckless behavior has serious consequences. And so the book is really good literature, and it's classic because it is fun and it has excellent pacing. Like, you're swept in and you're taken through the story, and you feel like it's going somewhere with every single chapter. It's a bit of a cliffhanger. My kids thoroughly enjoyed it, gave it 5 stars. We had great discussions. So I recommend reading The Mouse and the Motorcycle for sure to your 3rd graders. I read Runaway Ralph, which follows Ralph as he, again, wants to seek some adventure and decides that he wants to go to summer camp. And he goes to summer camp. I did not like the sequel. I felt like Ralph spent much of the book locked away at summer camp in a cage. The object and spectacle of the campers, being fed by the campers. And I just felt like it just didn't have the adventure that the first book had. The next book that I read for our nighttime read aloud was Zoe and Sassafras by Asia Citro. I love this book. It follows a little black girl whose mother is a scientist, who she discovers has magical powers to see magical animals that come to her house and ring her barn doorbell behind their house for help. And so her mother thinks that she's the only one who can see these animals, but then discovers that actually her daughter can see the animals too. And so when her mother goes away on a business trip, Zoe is tasked with minding the doorbell and making sure that anybody that comes to that door is helped by her. But she's nervous to help these animals. It teaches science, there's fantasy, there's magic, and problem solving, and being brave and facing challenges in life with bravery and not shying away from a challenge. So I love all of the Zoe and Sassafras books. If you haven't ever read them to your kids can probably read them on their own. Most of my kids can read these books on their own, but I chose to read this aloud to pique their interest because I had bought all 6 of them. And every time I pulled them out for my 2nd and 3rd graders and said, hey guys, like I bought these books. I have tons of books in our library, but I wanted to highlight these books because I knew that they were easy early chapter books that they could read on their level. They always turned it down and they were like, no, I don't think so. I want to choose this. I want to choose Bad Kitty. I want to choose something else. And I really wanted them to read it for that scientific element. So I read aloud, and guess what? Now everybody is reading Zoe and Sassafras. So that is a tip for you. If you buy your kids new books and you find that they're just not picking them up, no matter how many times you suggest them, reading the back can pique their interest, but sometimes even that doesn't work. So what I recommend is for your nighttime read aloud, read one of the books aloud, get their interest piqued, and then allow them to read the rest of the series on their own. Now I want to talk to you about my favorite book that I read in August, and please forgive the fact that this video is so long. I only have 3 more books to talk about. This book is called The Bullet That Missed, and it is a Richard Osman book. I had no idea that this was a series. I went to the library because I love checking out books from the library. And I saw this book called The Bullet That Missed. It's a mystery that follows some retirees living in a retirement community. Their names are Elizabeth Joyce, Ron, and Ibrahim with a few side characters as well. And they all have interesting prior careers. And one, Ibrahim, is a psychologist. Elizabeth is a former spy. Joyce, I cannot remember her former job, but I think it was something in the foreign service or government. And Ron was I can't even remember what he did, but regardless, they all had very interesting careers, and they live in this retirement community, and they discovered that they like solving murder mysteries. So they take on this cold case, and when they start doing some snooping, things turn ugly. A kidnapping happens. The book is first of all, if you love books set in England, like British literature or British fiction, this is the most quintessentially British book you have ever read in your life. I love reading British literature, but it's not. It's set in the modern day. It's fun. It's funny. It is so heartwarming. It's not a murder mystery that makes you feel afraid. There's tension, perfect suspense, perfect relationship building where you feel invested in the characters and you love the characters. You're giggling through the whole entire book. Do you know the villains in Pippi Longstockings, where they're basically hapless idiots who, are looking to steal from Pippi Longstockings? I don't know if you guys have read that one, but don't you love when a criminal ends up being some funny, quirky guy who is not at all what you expected him to be, and he's really doesn't even like blood, and he really doesn't that's the vibe that you get from this book. It's not a scary murder mystery. It's just this warm, cozy cup of tea that is hilarious, and it's the perfect book for fall. But here's the problem. I did not know that this was the 3rd book in the series. So I get halfway in and I realize yes, I'm following along, but it's there's a ton of characters. And it just kind of I was writing down the characters' names and I was like, good Lord, this is a lot of characters to be introduced at once. And then I realized that it was the 3rd book. So of course, I had to buy the 1st and the 2nd. And there's a 4th and a 5th. It's not in the series. There's a 5th book by him. So I cannot wait to read these fall. I'm in the midst of reading a different book with my sister right now, but I'm definitely going to be reading those this fall. Perfect fall books, perfect cozy books, must read books. The best. If you get on Goodreads, you will see every single review almost is just chef's kiss. Excellent author. I highly recommend. The book I want to talk about, second penultimate book that I want to talk about is You Like It Darker by Stephen King. I read this collection of short stories this month, and I know some people who watch are going to be reading this very soon, so I'm not going to spoil it for you. But this has several different short stories in it. And I will say, I'm always intimidated by a long Stephen King book because it's really hard for me to dedicate a month of my life to reading 800 pages of a Stephen King book. I've read a few, and I think this is maybe my 3rd Stephen King book that I've read. But it's basically a series of short stories, which I find so much more digestible because for me, if I read one, like there's one short story in it that was really weird and scary and very like, it gives you like an ick vibe. Like there's this creeper and his grandfather is creepy and he's creepy and they both like murder. But anyway, for the most part, these were not creepy, scary stories. In all, I would say I would highly recommend that you pick this up. I gave this series of short stories 5 stars. I loved almost every single story except for that one. And one of my favorite stories was called Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream. And it follows this guy named Danny who has a terrible dream one night that someone has been murdered in a part of his town that he's never even out the outskirts of town that he can't even remember ever going to. And he shows up and he finds a dead body buried in the ground and a dog gnawing at the dead body's hand. And he's like, holy crap, this dream was real. And then some really unlucky things take place. So that was my favorite story. Another of my favorite stories in this collection was called The Answer Man is what it's called. He gives you answers. And, you know, for a couple of bucks, he kind of tells you if he answers your questions. His storytelling is impeccable. He wrote a historical short story in this collection. He wrote one set in Vietnam. He wrote one set in the near future. He set one written in the 80s and 90s. Like all of his stories, he has such versatility. He has such wide breadth in terms of his ability to tell a story from multiple different perspectives. He's just a masterclass in writing and in keeping you engaged. Highly recommend that one. And the last book that I read was called the last book I read this month was called My Husband by Maud Ventura. This was a translated work from French, I believe. And it follows a woman who I don't even think we ever learned her name. It's a very short book. And it follows this woman who is obsessed with her husband. She feels that her husband is everything. She loves her husband more than she loves her children. And it basically shows her inner dialogue as she is thinking through how she's obsessed with her husband, taking every little offense to the nth degree, writing down all of his offenses, all the little slights, all the things that she feels like he doesn't live up to. And her behavior is really incongruent with her feelings. So she feels this extreme passion and love for her husband, but she treats him with like coldness to try to keep him, you know, wanting her. She's very distant with him. And so the whole book, you're following her thinking, well, where is this going? Like she's obsessed with her husband. You're learning that she's really insane and she's a crazy person. Where is this going? You have to read the book to find out. I will say that it took all the way to the epilogue to get the payoff. So the whole time you're like, is this going anywhere? And then at the very end, you're like, oh, okay. All right, well, that was a nice little twist. And you're like, did I really need to read that? Pretty forgettable. So I feel like I had a pretty good reading book month, completing 10 books and DNFing 3. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope I see you on my next video. Bye.